Hello, everyone. In this podcast, we will be discussing sensitive topics such as sexual assault. It's important to take care of yourself while listening. Some suggestions are listening while you're in a healthy headspace or knowing who you can reach out to if you become upset. Our 24/7 helpline for crisis calls based out of Central Florida is 407-500-HEAL. By contacting the national hotline at 1-800-656-4673, you can get support and learn about your local resources. There's always someone ready to help. Welcome to the Victim Service Center podcast. Here we sit down with professionals that serve survivors and victims of trauma, or those who've experienced violence, and have conversations about social issues. This week, we are talking about dating apps and sexual assault. My name is Emily Mitchell. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the education coordinator at the Victim Service Center of Central Florida. With me today, I have two amazing people returning. So first up, I do have Dr. Erica Fissel. So Dr. Fissel uses she, her pronouns and is an assistant professor in the Department of Criminal Justice and a member of the Violence Against Women cluster at the University of Central Florida, or UCF. She is an expert on interpersonal cyber victimization with particular expertise in examining theoretical causes and correlates of victimization, post-victimization behaviors such as reporting and help-seeking behaviors, and the consequences of victimization. So Dr. Fissel, thank you so much for coming back onto the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me back. I look forward to this conversation.
And I also have returning Rhonda Wilson. So Rhonda uses she, her pronouns and has been part of the VSC team for over 10 years. I think it's about 12 at this point. She has 3 graduate degrees. So that includes a Master of Human Services, an MBA, and a Master in Administration of Justice and Security. Rhonda has over 30 years of experience in criminal military justice. She served in the U.S. Navy for 20 years. After retiring from the Navy, Rhonda worked as the director of a residential reentry center for inmates transitioning from federal prisons. Rhonda's goal is to engage the entire community in activities that prevent sexual assault and crime. And Rhonda is our lead advocate who oversees the advocacy department at the VSC. So Rhonda, thank you so much for also coming back onto the podcast.
Thank you for having me again, Emily. I'm looking forward to this conversation too.
Me too, because just as a brief introduction, as the VSC is the Rape Crisis Center for Orange, Osceola, and Seminole counties in Central Florida. And with that, the VSC works, of course, with survivors of any kind of trauma, but a lot of the survivors that we work with are survivors of sexual violence and sexual assault. So through our work with our clients, the VSC has found that many of those survivors met their rapists through dating apps. So today we will be looking at some statistics and how possibly COVID has affected this, sharing some warning signs or red flags we can all be on the lookout for, addressing victim blaming that is specific to cyber victimization, and finally, we'll be talking about how to set boundaries as well as help support a loved one in their healing journey. So we've got a full agenda today, but I'd like to start off this podcast with some statistics. So, and anyone can jump in at any time, but how frequently is this actually happening?
Well, from our agencies, what we're seeing through clients that come through our center, I went back to about last 5 years of collecting data on dating apps / social media. It is happening on dating apps, but it's also happening on other platforms of social media. So I took statistics when we started seeing a pattern. We started recording this and finding out, what's really going on out there. So the statistics I have started from August of 2017 to August of 2021. So I got a good 5 years worth of data. And On the platform, I can tell you that it has gone up. During COVID, it was down 9%. And in 2020, it was 9%. Before that, it was always around 9%. 2021 so far, all the way up to August of this year, it's gone up 3%. So we're at 12% now of people meeting individuals on dating apps or social media. And the reason why I wanted to throw social media in here, because some of these kind of surprised me, because I wasn't, I was kind of surprised about this. So what come in number 5, some of our clients were meeting these individuals on Snapchat. Tied for number 3 and 4, it was Plenty of Fish, which is a dating app, but it was also Facebook, which is a social platform. Number 2 came in, another social platform, was Instagram. And the number 1 dating app that our clients are meeting individuals through is Tinder. So of all the 5 years, Tinder was 29%, Instagram was 13%, and both the Facebook and Plenty of Fish was 9%. And Snapchat was at 8%. So that's kind of roughly kind of give you an idea of what's going on out there in the dating scene when we're talking social media and the dating apps.
I really appreciate you pulling all this data, Rhonda, and I also am really grateful that your team has decided to record this. I think this is important information. It's amazing the difference between the number 1 and the number 2. So, I mean, yes. 13% is Instagram, but then it's like 29% is Tinder. So a lot of people are meeting people through Tinder. And I agree. I think it's really surprising. I think Snapchat's being used a lot as well as Instagram. We can see that from the stats. And of course, it's just Central Florida, right?
Yes,
so
yes, it's just Central Florida.
Right. But it's pretty remarkable to think of, there's a whole nother piece that I haven't thought of as far as social media being used. So we already addressed that, like we're seeing an uptick from COVID. And I don't know if anyone has any comments as why that may be, if they have any ideas why we're seeing that trend.
I would say largely probably because of the lockdowns and quarantines and all of that. A lot of people aren't meeting others out and about in the communities. People are more hesitant to go out, at least they were more hesitant to go out. So this was really the way to interact with people and have social interactions. So that would be my guess is why we see an uptick during COVID.
I have to agree with you, Dr. Fissel. Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'd like to ask you, Rhonda, too, like what is the typical scenario or trend you're seeing with our clients as far as, are the dating apps being used or social media sites being used to start communication and then the sexual violence occurs after the first meeting or something?
A couple of cases that I can think of off the top of my head. One of our clients met an individual through Snapchat, and I don't know if it just came across their feed, and then they started or on Instagram, they started going back and forth. And then next thing you know, it's like, well, let's meet up. And then it's like, okay. And they meet them and then it happens. And then I had another incident where an individual knew this person on Facebook for about a few years, decided to meet them, because they've been doing FaceTime or Facebook. And when they end up meeting them, it happened, and that's not what the client wanted. That they wanted to start, do the normal course of meeting and talking and going out and like that. So it happens in a variety of different ways. One was very short, like within a few days. Another one, it was a few years.
Wow, I think that's a huge difference there, just showing how individualized these scenarios can be. And it sounds like it can be absolutely like out of left field for survivors. So with that, I think it might be important to talk a little bit about like warning signs or red flags. So what are some of those warning signs or red flags that people should maybe be mindful of?
Some of the warning flags that I've noticed with some of our clients is that, let's say somebody direct messages you and, or private messages you. What happens is they want to use a different platform. They want to pull you out of that platform because things can be recorded in that platform. If they pull you over someplace else, it can't be recorded. It can be deleted. It can go away. And so there's no evidence there of ever having interactions with this particular individual. Another warning sign is that they want to get to know you way too fast, or they're asking you a lot of personal questions, and it's like, whoa, we need to slow down. And those are some of the warning signs that I've seen in talking to clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Fissel, I know that you work a lot in like cyber victimization and things like that. I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, so I think another warning sign or red flag that is often occurring is if they ask for money. If you've never met someone and they are already asking you for money, or, hey, I really want to meet you, but I don't have money for an Uber. Can you Venmo me X amount of money and then I'll come see you? That's probably not what's actually going to happen. That's a huge red flag.
Oh, and another red flag I was thinking about as Dr. Fissel was talking, when the person that they're communicating with wants the client come to them. It's never meeting in a neutral place or that person coming to them. They always want the person that they're reaching out to come to them.
Yeah, and sometimes, people will ask, and I know we're going to talk about this a little later, that people will ask to video chat or something beforehand, or say, hey, send me a picture of who you are. And if the other person refuses to do that, then that's probably a bad sign as well.
Yes. I had one client, because you made me think of that when you said that said they were talking to somebody on Snapchat, or they're, just talking. They weren't sending pictures or anything like that. And they said, snap me a picture of you right now. I want to see what you look like right now. And the person wouldn't do it. So yeah, they get it, because they felt like that was a safe way of knowing that, is this who I'm really talking to? I want to see it in a movement type, because you can video it and send it instead of just a picture.
So that you bring up a good point, Rhonda, about I want to see that you're the person that I am talking to, and that who I think you are, which falls into this catfishing idea, right? Yes. So catfishing, creating this online persona, for the sole reason to lure someone into a relationship with you. But just because someone is who they say they are doesn't necessarily mean that they're a safe person. So a lot of warning signs or red flags, I think, that are talked about related to cyber safety are about make sure you know who you're talking to, which is obviously super important, but that's not the end all be all, because you could be talking to some person. You could meet up and it's the exact person that you thought you were talking to, but something could still happen after that. So that's where some of the tips that we'll talk about later to be safe when you do end up meeting people.
Absolutely. And we talked about, some case studies already, Rhonda. I don't know if you have any others that you want to bring up before we kind of move into kind of shift gears here.
Those are the ones I can think of off the top of my head that really stood out to me, because I know some of the clients, they said they met the person on Tinder or whatever, but, it's not really elaborated on how long they were communicating with that individual. So I just want to make sure I gave you at least a couple examples of what we've seen.
Definitely. Yeah. I think the important thing is that we're seeing that it's happening and it looks different in a lot of different ways. And with that, I think that, in our previous episodes on this podcast, we've talked a lot about victim blaming, because I always want to be really clear when we talk about like red flags and we talk about ways to protect yourself, that we avoid this piece to it. And so with that, what are some common victim blaming mentalities that we have for people who have gone through or are going through cyber victimization?
So I think one of the biggest things when we're connecting it to specifically dating apps and what might happen once you meet someone is that there is this misperception or this victim blaming attitude that you are only on dating apps to hook up. So people have this mentality that's like, well, what did you think was going to happen? Why else would you be on Tinder if that's not what you were interested in? And it drives me crazy. But I think that's probably the most common one that I see or hear.
Definitely, kind of exactly what you said. Like, what were you expecting? It's almost like when we think of other victim blaming ideas where it's like, well, what were you expecting when you went to that party? Right? It's like, well, I was expecting to do this, not that, that's not an invitation to have any harm done to me. Absolutely.
Kind of going off that is this idea or misperception that everyone has the same intentions, and that dating apps, everyone that you interact with are going to have those same intentions and they're going to be safe because they all are thinking the same thing that you are. And that's obviously not going to be the case.
Right. So, for example, if someone has the intention of meeting someone and dating someone through a dating app, and maybe finding like a life partner, for example, they assume that other people are also having that mentality. And so obviously this is, puts people at risk in a way. So that's definitely a misconception for sure. So with these other like victim blaming, things happening, what are some things that supporters, I should say, should avoid saying to a survivor who met their perpetrator on a dating app?
Well, don't say, well, what else or what do you think was going to happen? You were on Tinder. Like, what do you expect?
I know. I got nothing on that one because it's kind of, it goes to, it's with the dating apps and the social media hookup, it's so easy to blame the victim. It is so easy to do that and not even realize you're doing it. And
yeah,
and support is like, well, the only thing, a support could do is like, have you reported it to the app? Have you blocked that person? Or, something like, what can I do to help you to get this report? Do we need to report to law enforcement? Or, I can be there to support you, to be along with you as you report it. And that's the only thing I can, really think of to help support that individual. Call the victim service center. I mean, sit down with a crisis counselor. We'll be able to help to walk you through it and talk through the crisis and figure out, okay, what's the next step that needs to be done.
Yeah, I would say it's really the same for any other type of victimization. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people, especially when you bring that catfishing or romance scam idea back into it, people think that only like older people or gullible people or desperate people will fall for that. And it's not true. There's a reason why people who engage in these types of cyber perpetrations target dating apps, because people are looking for companionship and looking for love and looking for happiness. And that is a human natural thing to want. So they are targeting people specifically for being a human being, basically. And no one should feel guilty about that. So I think if you know someone who is experiencing this or has experienced this, know that like just support them and don't judge them, because it could literally happen to anybody.
Yes, it's very easy to fall into that, very easily.
Absolutely. And I think that just avoiding, as always, like why questions, because that can insinuate blame. Pressing for details can be triggering, of course, but also insinuate blame as well. So yeah, it's the same as any other, victimization. I do think that, yeah, you're right, though. There's like this added piece to it where it's like that obvious question that we definitely should avoid saying, which is, well, what did you think would happen? Yeah. That's just so damaging. And I wanted to ask as well, we talk about victim blaming a lot, but why do you think we as a society do victim blame?
There is this perspective called the just world hypothesis. And basically, as humans, we like to believe that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people, because it's a way for us to protect ourselves. So we think, well, I would never meet someone at their house after meeting them on a dating app. So I am not going to be at risk of victimization. So it's really not an intentional thing for most people. It is just inherent. We are trying to make ourselves feel better and feel safer. And that's why most people engage in it.
It makes a lot of sense. But what's so interesting about it is that it actually makes us more vulnerable to it, because we believe that we're safe if we avoid these things. But in reality, it doesn't discriminate and it can happen to anyone.
Absolutely.
Which is the true way to kind of end violence, is to do like active bystander intervention and keeping each other safe and things like that. But I would like to kind of preface this next part of the conversation with, again, and I can say this until I'm blue in the face, no matter what, it is not your fault what happens. So you have every right to safety, however you use dating apps and social media. With that, what are some tools or options people have in using these apps in a way that can make them feel more safe and empowered?
Well, what you can do is especially if they're local, you could ask them if they would meet you in a public place. If you are to meet somebody in a public place, tell your friends who they are. For example, I had a friend that was meeting somebody in a public place. She sent me the address. So if I didn't hear back from her from a certain time frame, I had the name, I had the address, and I had the phone number. Also, you can do the video meeting. You can do that. But still, it's still not the same as being in person, because, back before the social media and the dating apps we had validation of the individual who we met. Here, it's like there's no validation when you're on social media or dating apps.
I can jump in for a few other ones. So related to meeting in person, drive yourself. Don't rely on that person for transportation. Before meeting up with them, I would always recommend doing a reverse Google image search. That helps with the catfishing thing, to make sure that they're the person that you're talking to. But it also just helps it might find their social media accounts and give you a little more information about who the person is that you're meeting with. In that same breath, though, I would also say that if you are setting up an online dating app or account on a dating app, use different photos on your dating profile than you do anywhere else on social media, because they can reverse image search you. And then they could try to connect with you on other platforms. So for example, you don't even need to match with someone, right? So if someone stumbles upon your Tinder account, for example, they can screenshot your picture, put it through the reverse Google image search and find your Instagram and try to connect with you that way, even though you didn't match with them on Tinder. So that's another way to keep safe. None of these are necessarily like hard and fast rules, but if you match with someone that doesn't have a bio or no linked account or only has one picture, possibly a fake account, really just have to trust your gut and know that, people are online and they can say whatever they want to say. So you should really listen to your intuition.
Speaking about your intuition, I feel like there's almost like societal pressure to kind of like not trust your gut almost. And I like to lean in about that. Do you feel like there's like this pressure to, if someone messages us, that we feel like we should message back even though we feel weird about it? Or do you think there's this pressure about like people sending friend requests and we feel like we have to respond?
To me, that's where you can put your boundaries up. You don't have to respond. It's okay to say no. It's okay to say, this makes me uncomfortable. I'm not comfortable moving to a different platform. It's because to me, it's okay. I mean, in some people, have a hard time putting up those boundaries. That's something that you can practice on, because you're not seeing them face to face. So you can turn around and say, no, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm sorry. This is probably not going to work out.
I think it's also a generational thing. So Gen Zs probably more so than millennials, but they really grew up with social media, and the more friends you have or the more likes you have or whatever, the more popular you are. And unfortunately, there's a lot of self-worth tied to how popular your social media accounts are. And I think sometimes people put that above really listening to, this doesn't seem like someone I should add.
Yeah, and I just want to go back a little bit to Dr. Fissel. If someone is feeling kind of uncomfortable and wants to do that reverse Google image search, how can you walk someone through that? How is that process? Is it simple? Is it difficult? It sounds like almost like a hacker is like sitting down and typing.
No. So within Google, I mean, you could just Google reverse image search and it'll bring it up, and you just literally upload the JPEG file and it will show you what other places that same photo shows up on, not on social media, on the internet. So it should pull up if it's people's public profile pictures for any social media, if it's on websites, if it's anywhere on the internet, it should come up.
I love that this is kind of like twofold as a tool, where it's like good to know for your own safety, but also I appreciate you kind of bringing in that other piece to it. It's like, keep in mind that other people can do this too. So whatever you want to do to kind of feel safe and protect yourself, make sure just to know that it's good to know that this can happen for sure. What about, if, speaking on boundaries and things like that, if they do want to meet up with someone, is it good to set up some guidelines as far as where to meet and having specific criteria, and what can that criteria be, for example?
Yeah, I think the hard thing with dating apps is that we have all these tips, meet in person, do all these things, but there are people who use dating apps solely as a hookup platform, and that is okay to do, which makes it, but these tips don't apply to you then, right? You're not going to meet up in a public place if that is the purpose that you're using the dating app for. So I would say the guidelines and boundaries are way more important if you are going to take that approach. So having conversations ahead of time, what you're expecting, and that might be uncomfortable, but at least going in that everyone's on the same page. Particularly now, it's totally fine if you want to know if someone's vaccinated from COVID or not, and that's going to be a dictating factor. If they have an STI check or not, and dictating that, if depending on what part of town they live in, literally anything that makes you feel safe, what your boundaries are, those conversations should be had.
For sure. And I appreciate that you brought that up already, Rhonda, too, about setting boundaries and that it's okay to do. I'd like to kind of lean in, and talk a little bit about how to actually do that, because I think that people can feel kind of guilty setting boundaries. There can be a lot of, you said it might be an awkward conversation to them. We're not kind of taught how to set boundaries. And I talk all the time in my sexual assault trainings when I talk about childhood sexual abuse and things like that. You need to teach your children early on that they have boundaries and they have rights to those boundaries. So doing things where we're you go to a family, meeting, and you're go give so-and-so a hug, and they're uncomfortable and they're I don't want to. And no, go do it. That's kind of teaching them that they don't have a right to their body and they don't have a right to exercise their boundaries. So with that, I feel we're not taught how to set them. So do you have any tips for anyone who's feeling kind of nervous to do it? Kind of how would you walk someone through that?
I'd say step number one is figure out what your boundaries are, which is probably one of the hardest parts of the process is figure out, really sit down and be honest with yourself. What are you comfortable with? If you are not comfortable meeting up with someone who is not vaccinated, then don't do it. If you're not comfortable meeting up with someone who lives in a certain part of town or whatever, literally doesn't matter what the reason is, just be honest with yourself, because that's really the first step.
Some of the things I was thinking of too is that sometimes you might have a friend that gives you that support, and that like if you were going to meet somebody and you got the boundaries and all that, and you have them there, but maybe off in the distance, meeting in the public. I mean, I've had friends that decided to meet somebody, and then their friend was at a restaurant at the next booth over watching, just to make sure, okay, are we good to go? Are we safe and all that? And they stayed with them, and then they left with them and not leave with that individual.
Yeah. And I think even, you could practice setting the boundaries with a friend or a family member. If you say, these are the boundaries I have, I'm trying to articulate this to this person. Could we role play this scenario, or could I send you what I want to send to them and get your feedback on how this is coming off? Because I think people have this fear of coming off as like rude or something, but it's your boundaries, it's your well-being. You're allowed to be selfish.
It's okay to be rude. It's just, to me, it's not any different than getting into an elevator with somebody you didn't know, you didn't feel comfortable. You can turn around and say, I'm sorry, I'll take the next one. That's a prime example of what you could do. I'm sorry, this isn't going to work, or I'm sorry, I don't want to meet right now. It's okay to say that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I talk a lot about boundaries in my trainings too. So you're right. I think that there needs to be this introspection kind of happening first of like, what are my boundaries? So if you're finding yourself feeling resentful or uncomfortable, you're feeling kind of moody, that might be feeling kind of uncomfy with anything. That could be a sign that there needs to be a boundary to be set, and just kind of listen to that and trust that and honor it too. And then from there, kind of communicating your boundary. I love the idea of doing role play. That's amazing. I like to also add, you're absolutely right, Rhonda, doesn't matter what the boundary is, you're allowed to be whatever to keep yourself safe. And so I like to say, communicate it in as few words as possible. And also you don't have to apologize for it, because I like to say communicating boundaries is basically telling someone like, this is how to keep me safe. For loved ones, can be like, this is how to correctly love me. And, however people react to the boundaries you set, absolutely not your fault or problem, really. You're only supposed to just share in a respectful way, share your boundary. That's really what you're, responsible for. And I would also argue it doesn't always have to be respectful either, if it's to keep you safe.
Yeah. And if people have a bad reaction to that, is that really someone you want in your life anyway? Probably not. So
they'll get over it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that kind of goes on the other side too. If someone's like setting a boundary with you, they want the relationship to continue with you. They're not trying to cut anything off. And, the boundary is simply being like, this isn't working, but I would like it to continue working. So this is going to help keep this going. And boundaries change all the time. And so when someone sets it, don't, try not to take it like personally, and then, expect that the same thing when you set a boundary, right? Absolutely. Speaking of boundaries, how can we use boundaries with our own phones and technology?
So if you're downloading any app, whether it's a dating app or a social media app, I know no one does it, but you should read the terms and conditions before accepting or creating the account or downloading it. At whatever point that they say to read the terms and conditions, you should probably read it, because a lot of these various apps automatically have certain things turned on, and then you would have to go in and basically lock down your account to make it more private. So the initial privacy setting on most apps are not private. They are public by default, and you have to go in and fix that yourself. So there are certain apps that will share your GPS location with your connections unless you turn that off. So it's annoying, I know, to read all of the terms and conditions, but it's really the best way to know what's going on with your app as soon as you log into it, and what you might need to do to set the boundaries that you want on those apps.
Yeah, it sounds like, I know that it's pages and pages and pages. Sounds like it would be helpful to just kind of zone in on or hone in on the privacy settings and kind of check on those. And there's a lot of different options too. So I know that, like, for example, Facebook, it could be public, but it could also be like semi-public where it's just with your friends and maybe their friends. So you have to know that too. Could just be specific people. Like if you want specific people to not see your posts, but still like be friends with them, you have that option. So you have like a lot of different things that you can play around with and just know what works best for you as far as a boundary. And yeah, I think the GPS situation, it being kind of like a default where they're tracking you, that's super important to know about. So yeah, and I think also like close your apps too if you're not using them. And you that's just like another kind of added thing that if you're thinking that like maybe they're tracking or something like that, just close it. And if that makes you feel better, definitely do that too.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is how it's set up now, but 5-ish years ago for Tinder, you either had to have I think you had to have a Facebook to be able to set up a Tinder. So it connected to your Facebook account, and then it would show your matches or it would show if you had like mutual friends with potential people. And that's obviously can be concerning because you don't necessarily want people to know your Facebook accounts or whatever for whatever reason. So knowing that too if you're setting up an app, is it connected to other accounts that you might not want to actually be connected? And unfortunately, in some cases, that means that you won't use the app because it has things that you don't fit within your boundaries. And that's just what it has to be.
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, once again, like you have every right to set these boundaries. And also you have every right to privacy and whatever that means to you. So I really appreciate that. So if someone did experience sexual violence through meeting someone through a dating app, how can the VSC help that person?
Well, we can help that person if they, once it happened in the individual or the client would like to have some help, they can always call our sexual assault helpline at 407-500-HEAL, HEAL, or 4325. You can also call our office line at 407-254-9415. That office is open from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, and talk to one of our advocates there. Like I said, the hotline, you can access it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and just get feedback and talk to whoever the advocate is, the crisis counselor is there, and just walk through it and figure out what your options will be.
Absolutely. And I always like to mention completely free stuff, free, confidential, and advocates can they're like rock stars. They can do a lot of different things, connect you with resources, and know where to, hand you off if need be. Like we would never turn anyone away,
right.
And things like that, and then help you through like immediate crisis counseling, maybe going through the justice system. If someone does want to report, for example, can people actually report to the dating app or site?
I think it's all depending on what that particular app has. I know that one of my friends was telling me it's not detailed. You can put blocked or report, but when you go into it, it's not very detailed what you're reporting or what you're blocking. But I don't know how the other apps are, but there on all these dating apps, there should be some way you can report this individual.
Yeah, so I was actually looking at it before our call today, and Tinder specifically, that's all I got to look at, but Tinder does have a page that has tips on how to stay safe and has ways that you can report to the platform, but also links to a ton of other different resources too for people who might experience it. So I know, for example, they link to RAIN, which is a great website. They also have a page related to dating app safety too. So that's another great resource for those who might not be local to Central Florida who are listening and can't access VSC. But so I know some do, but what I don't know is what happens after that.
Right.
So I don't know who those reports go to, if there's anything that actually happens based on what's reported. So I would always, well, I guess it depends on what you want your outcome to be. But if you want some sort of criminal justice-y kind of response, reporting to the platform is not going to be enough. You should probably do both. But again, it depends on what you want the outcome to be.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Dr. Fissel. And also, I completely forgot to bring up as well, like blocking is totally one of your options too, of course. And blocking is different on different platforms. So just check out what that is. Sometimes it means they can't message you at all. Sometimes it means that they can, but like in a public forum, like Discord can get kind of complicated with blocking too, which is an app. But so just check out that. And if that is the best course of action, definitely take advantage of that.
Most dating apps, it's not going to say block, you just unmatch them, which is essentially the same thing, but it's just another way that it's set up. So if you unmatch someone, they can't talk to you.
Oh, that's great to know. Yeah, great feedback. And you brought up a good point of like, report if that works for you to the dating app. And if you're looking to more of a social justice route, you can report to law enforcement. So if someone does wish to do that, what is some evidence that they can collect or save? Do you have any tips for anyone?
To me, as long as you're able to capture the conversations and keep them and not delete them, that would help. But I know, like I said, if you get pulled from that platform and go to someplace else, it's going to be challenging because that's the reason why they're pulling you from the platform you're on right now.
Yeah. And I would say, really, if we're talking about a sexual assault that's happening after, you want all that typical evidence that you would need to report that to law enforcement. But any information that you can collect from how you met them, whether it's just a picture or a name, that would be useful. How you met them, when you met them, kind of a timeline might be useful if it gets deleted.
That's all really good, useful information to know. And I'm sure if someone, contacts, I love that Rain has like dating app safety as well. I'm sure that they would have more information on that too. And of course, if they connect with one of our advocates, we can help with that process too. So, that is definitely one option for someone to go on their healing journey. And we know that healing looks different for everyone. So what are some of the ways that someone could possibly heal from other victimizations, such as romance scams and catfishing and things like that?
I think the hardest part about these types of victimizations is it often puts people off from trying to find love again. And that really breaks my heart. Like, that's a very sad thing that happens as a result, because you're no longer trusting of other people. You're not necessarily trusting of the internet and cyberspace and being on there and communicating with other people. So I think finding out ways that you can ease back into that world. You don't want to, I don't know. I'm not going to tell you what you want to do, but you probably won't feel ready to just jump back in full speed ahead. So ease back in, again, find out what you're comfortable with. If maybe you start talking to someone, you have plans to meet up with them, and then you just don't feel good about it, it's okay to cancel. Just listen to what you need in that process. There are some organizations who are starting to do some like peer support groups so that you are interacting with people who have experienced the same sort of thing. And I think that can be really useful.
Yeah, I think that there can be this, again, kind of going back to the victim blaming piece to it, there can be this added like feelings of shame that come with it. So it's really nice to know that like you're not alone. So I can see totally why these support groups can be really helpful. And of course, the VSC has support groups, not specific for like dating apps and victimization, but we do have support groups of survivors of that identify as women, identify with the LGBTQ plus community, Black survivors of intimate partner violence, the list just goes on. But yeah, I think support groups can be really, really healing. And with that, what can supporters do to help survivors on their healing journey?
I would say it's probably going to vary from person to person.
Yeah.
So really just be there for your person and be there in the way that they need you to be there.
And listen to them and offers that support and, and help them along the journey like that. But being very supportive and listening to what they're saying will help out tremendously.
Absolutely. I think that, I love that, like what you said too, Dr. Fissel, as far as be that person's, whatever you are, right? If you're like a friend, continue being that friend. You're not like their therapist now, right? You're not the detective now. You're still their friend. And I love what you said, Rhonda. It sounds so simple, but yeah, listening is like a huge thing, and just validating their feelings, understanding. You can also like learn more about sexual violence and, come at it from that lens, and just, not urging them to do certain things, just being there and being kind of I like to say, if you're let the survivor drive the bus, but maybe you have a map and be like, where do you want to go? Let's go. Yeah. That kind of thing.
I would also say just don't necessarily focus all of your interactions on that topic. If, for example, if they're your friend, they probably still want to do friend things with you. So maybe they want to be distracted. They want to find happiness too in other things. So I like the idea of letting them drive the bus, and you're there for the ride and however they need you to be.
Yeah, I think that that's a wonderful place to sign off. So thank you so much to the listener for listening to the Victim Service Center podcast. The VSC is a nonprofit organization that provides free, confidential services for victims of any kind of trauma in Central Florida. To learn more about our services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear and you're not alone. And thank you so much, Rhonda and Dr. Fissel, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.